Dick and Mike Show.
Dick Overton. Mike Siver is on special assignment tonight. He's taken advantage of the opportunity to do something personal. We all have ball games and things. Mike is my often co-anchor here as we talk about things and interview people. Tonight, I have the distinct pleasure of having someone I've met before, know a little bit about, and became more intimately involved in his career when I read his book. And we'll see this on the screen a little bit. Maybe if Bill there in the office can clump up a little bit. Matt Cooper is a practicing attorney in southwestern Michigan and became involved in a case that made national news some time ago, and his book is about that. And we're going to talk about it because of the significance of personal rights, but more than often rights of military people. And Matt, as I told you, I'm a casual reader. I do 20, 30 pages a night if I can because it's recreation. I read your book in 2 days. I'm a former military, I was deployed many years ago in Vietnam. Your story about what happened to this family is extraordinary, it's angering, and I laud you for getting involved. It was a long, arduous case, but you became his champion. But James Hurley lived locally here in the Hartford area, was a longtime member of the Michigan National Guard, honorable service, great guy, great family guy, built his home in the Hartford, Bangor area, deployed overseas, and then the wheels came off. And tell us a little bit about what happened. Basically, his family who remained behind suddenly got notices that what? They were behind and going to lose their house. And
Yeah, well, Dick, I really appreciate you having me here tonight. And you know, when you held this book up, and I saw it on the TV screen over here, it's still just, it's such an honor for me to have been involved with Sergeant Hurley. And let me first say, when you put that book up there, I'm just shocked that I was involved with all of this. And the cover was done by Sean Hollins, who's with Fortitude Graphic and Design here in Kalamazoo.
Okay.
And what a wonderful job he did with this.
Right.
I mean, that's what just shocked me right now, looking at the cover. And Season Press with Sonia Hollins did a lot of the work with me on this. And she works with the publisher, and it's a product that I'm very proud of because of the work that they were able to do. But Sergeant Hurley is the hero in this story. What he went through, I can't imagine. He's a hero. I just can't imagine enduring what Sergeant James Hurley did through his years of service. He was with the Michigan National Guard for 25 years. So he's a man 45 years old. It's during President Bush's surge in the war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And this was at a time during that war when things were not necessarily going very well for us. And we needed the Bush surge to become definitive in what was going to happen. And so imagine being a 45-year-old man, wife, kids, obligations back home, and doing what your president told you to do. And that's what Sergeant Hurley did.
Right.
And he went to Iraq, and he found himself in the middle of what came to be known as the Bloody Triangle. And while there, things happened back home with his mortgage by one of the world's largest banks, Deutsche Bank, and one of the world's largest mortgage servicing companies, Saxon Mortgage. And they did things that were contrary to federal law. And I like to think historically about what our service members, our soldiers have had for protections, thinking that these rules in principle go back to General George Washington, not President Washington,
Right.
but when George Washington was a general and was fighting for our country's independence, he declared that when you assume the soldier, we do not lay aside the citizen.
Right.
And so he, at the founding of our nation, we're trying to balance this need of recognizing what our soldiers are doing and what their obligations are back home. And the next time in our country's history that you really saw this come up again was during the Civil War.
Right.
And the Civil War was not supposed to last as long as it did. It wasn't planned or anticipated to be such a long years and years and years. And a product of that was we were drawing from soldiers that were older and had responsibilities. And Abraham Lincoln recognized, as Washington did, that you can't ask a soldier to go off and defend our nation, to offer up their life, and have obligations back home that they're not allowed to defend themselves on. They're defending our country. Should they not be allowed the opportunity to defend themselves back home? And so Lincoln then established what Washington had started, and that was to have these protections. And he wasn't giving the soldiers anything. He wasn't saying, hey, you're not responsible for your debts or liabilities.
Right.
He was just saying, hey, I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back home and defend yourself while you're off defending our nation.
A mechanism that nothing bad can happen to you on these issues until you get back.
Right.
Right.
At least you don't want a soldier's mother or wife or children defending them when they're defending us.
Right.
Why can't they defend themselves?
Right.
And so the bank or the creditor continues to have interest. You know, time is money. They get their money. And so at least allow them to come back. And it was interesting that Jefferson Davis even did that for the Southern soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a principle that was based in the founding of our nation, and as we fought to preserve it. Then what happens in 1917? The world's at war. And so Congress is mulling over these types of protections, and they come to the understanding and conclusion in 1918, where they pass the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. Same kind of principles. Let's give our service members some civil protection. And so after World War I, those protections expired by their own terms. So what happens in 1940? World's at war again.
The issue arises again.
Yeah, and so Congress reenacts those protections from 1918, and we again have the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. That's what everybody really recognizes as the name of these protections. Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. That protected our service members and soldiers throughout World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. Come to 2003, we're deep into it in Iraq. And it's recognized by some colonels in the Pentagon and General Taft, who was President Taft's great-grandson, and Colonels John S. Odom, who's a practicing lawyer now in Shreveport, Louisiana, and Colonel Gregory Huckabee, who's a law professor in South Dakota. But at this time, they're working in the Pentagon, and they're tasked by General Taft to come up with some updates. And General Taft says, hey, while you're at it, let's give it a new name that represents all of our service members. And Colonel Huckabee works with the generals and the colonels, and they come up with this name, Servicemembers Civil Relief Act.
Okay.
And I find it always interesting that you put that into your computer, it tells you spelled it wrong. You know, because they want you to save two words.
Right.
So it's almost like they coined a whole new term, Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. And so that's passed. And to think Sergeant Hurley, the most recent amendments that have substance to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act are referred to by the drafters as the Hurley Amendments. So Sergeant Hurley, he has his fingerprints on what General Washington, President Lincoln, and every president since then has wanted for the protections of our soldiers. Sergeant Hurley and his amendments. And that's what I write about in this book.
Okay.
Really, not the history so much of the whole
Right.
act going back
Right.
to Washington. I just give that to you so you have an understanding
Yep.
of what's going on.
In reading your book, you had that same history, and that was useful. And interestingly enough, Hurley paid a very high price for it, as did his predecessors.
Right.
He just didn't make a complaint, and somebody said, that's a good idea.
Well, in my book, I
Yeah.
coin a term, Lincoln's 21st century soldiers.
Right.
Because our military now is made up of service members similar to the lot of people that Lincoln was drawing from.
Right.
And that's an older person that has volunteered. And so you have the soldier that has what? Credit, mortgages. And so you're 45 years old, you're Sergeant Hurley, you're living in a home that you've lived in for 10 years. And it was a beautiful home. He had created, he was a man that could build or do anything he wanted. And he did. He built floating docks, beautiful decks, gazebos. He had a workshop for the truck that he was rebuilding.
Right.
And he built the workshop.
When you kind of biographied him in there, just as you're saying now, I became more incensed because
Right.
what a great guy to have this happen to. I'm sorry, but
He's a wonderful person.
yeah,
and,
just
and he-
epitomizes the citizen soldier. What a great
and,
guy.
and people that haven't served, and I have not,
Mhm.
but that's what motivated me, I think, for my 5-year court battle for Sergeant Hurley, was trying to serve our soldiers and service members in another manner.
Right.
And if you read the book and you see what we went through, you'll have a good understanding of
Right.
what I was trying to endure. But imagine, what I was saying was, we don't understand what happens when someone is activated to go to war. It becomes a family ordeal. And so Sergeant Hurley's mother moves in with them. Sergeant Hurley wants to make sure his wife, and he's got 2 kids there, and his mom, that they're gonna be taken care of while he's gone. So what do? You stock the freezer. He had a year's supply of food in the freezer of venison, everything that he would hunt right off the land. Venison, ducks, salmon from the Paw Paw River. This was a beautiful home right along the Paw Paw River, and he could, catch fish, he could duck hunt. It was just a beautiful little slice of heaven he created. And they were gonna be set while he was gone. And so when you read the book, I don't wanna give spoilers, but you read the book, you become very angry about what happened to his family.
Right. And just for our viewers, I read the book in 2 days. It's a conversational book, and I want to make sure that people don't think this is for attorneys. It's not laced, it's not riddled with arguments of court and things that would put you to sleep. This is a story about what happened to a family. In parallel with that are the legal issues they ran into, and it tells a story of you defended them very nobly. My hat's off to you and your team, because you talk about the team that was involved. But read the book, and it's a story. It's a great story. It's a story that will anger you. There are some details, but we talked before we got on the air. I thought you did a very good job of putting them in layman's terms. Periodically, you had to go back to what the essence of your stance was and why you took this position, and that then becomes telling someone what the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act's about.
Well,
But it's a great story and an easy read. It's not a Black's Law dictionary or anything.
right, I think, I just want people to know, if you're in the Kalamazoo viewing area, it's very easy to purchase. The Kazoo Books has 2 locations in Kalamazoo, and they're carrying the book. The Michigan News Agency downtown Kalamazoo, they have the book for sale. Shampoo Hut and Paw Paw, they have the book for sale, as does Walton Marie's out by Lake Cora in Paw Paw. And Lowry's Books in Three Rivers and Sturgis, they're carrying the book.
Right.
And you can get it, I think he put something up about it being available on Amazon.
Right there, yep.
And so you go to the search window and you just put in Matthew Cooper, A Soldier's Home, and within 2 days it'll be shipped right to your home.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to market it. If anybody knows anyone at Tail Wings at the airport in Kalamazoo,
Right.
they have a couple books there. I'd love to have them carry my book, because this book and the story it tells is important to our veterans as well as to our active duty service members right now. And after the case, I brought with me today this 2015 revised Michigan Judge's Guide to the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. And this is something that the foundation that I started with Frank Melchiori and Lisa Hudson, the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act Foundation. We worked with Western Michigan University and Cooley Law School. We're both on the back cover here.
Yeah.
And our foundation provided one of these judges' guides to every federal, state, and tribal judge in the entire state of Michigan. And what's really interesting about that is it caught the attention of the Department of Army. And the Department of Army has partnered me with Army One Source, and the Department of Army. And I'm working right now on a judge's guide with Indiana University Law School to do a judge's guide for Indiana, as well as with Cooley Law School in Florida to do one in Florida. And I'd like to try to do one in every state. And so that's where if you go to scrafoundation.org, that'll tell you some more information about the foundation. But that's dated 2015. 2015. So
Pretty dang current.
pretty current.
Yeah.
And this is a revised judge's copy, because the copy of the judge's guide to the SCRA that all the judges had prior to this said that you could not bring a private right of action for a violation of your rights under the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act.
In layman's terms, that means,
That if your rights are violated, you cannot do anything about it. So Sergeant Hurley, and you know what case is cited for the proposition that you cannot bring a private right of action in that first judge's guide is Hurley versus Deutsche Bank. Because at one time, and you'll read about that in the book, the judge threw the Hurley case out. And so not only was that strong precedent, a judge's guide was made saying that you could not bring a private right of action. And so I have the foundation logo, and I really worked hard on designing something that I thought would be interesting to people. And you see the V for victory. I got a color of each branch of the service. You got the home and the family, and the international sign for distress, SOS with a line over it. Well, the big thing is the shield. That's President Lincoln trying to protect his soldiers from being subjected to civil action while they're serving our country. The swords are the Hurley case. And so think about that.
the ability to fight back.
The ability to do something about it when your rights are violated.
Right.
What good is a right if there's no remedy?
Right.
That is the line of thought that comes about when you address this type of issue. Think about it. What good is a right if you have no remedy?
Right.
And that's what I'm saying when that's what the Hurley case is all about. Those are part of the Hurley amendments. That if your rights are violated, you have a remedy. You can take someone to task for violating your rights.
Show the harm that was done in the process, and you have relief.
So I mean, we should jump ahead and talk about when Sergeant Hurley comes home from the bloody triangle.
Right. And
Who's in his house?
And
Who's in this house that he's loved and adored for 10 years?
the people that bought it in good faith after it was illegally taken from them.
After it was illegally
And that's
taken.
the other side of this, is a human interest story. And again, you want not only veterans and military people to read it, but there are shows on television that are very popular, like 48 Hours and Unsolved Mysteries. And a part of that theme is often, gosh, I can't believe this happened, or that policeman missed that, or this and that. We sometimes are appalled by the things that happen within our system. There's a great deal of that in this book, that the average layman would say, gosh, that's unbelievable that they acted that way or they took that stance. You do a nice job in layman's terms of showing a judge who asserted there was no relief, and then even after you showed him, he entertained a motion to not provide relief, and he upheld it.
Well, that's why, after I did the Hurley case,
Right.
it's the landmark case.
Right.
And so I was constantly getting phone calls from soldiers and service members all over the country, world even, for help. And so that's why I wanted to do the foundation. And then what I learned was there's people that still just refer to it as the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. And so part of my desire in doing this book was to make it entertaining, so that people, society, this is important for veterans, this is important for our soldiers and service members on active duty. And how do you get that message out there? Well, you try to write a book that people will enjoy reading.
Right.
And so the Hurley story is incredible. It was 5 years. Imagine 5 years for just one case. When I first filed that, I was all by myself filing that. And you mentioned the team. Matt Cooper from Paw Paw sues Deutsche Bank, Saxon Mortgage Company,
A true David and Goliath story to start with.
and a large Midwestern law firm.
Yep.
Think of what I faced with poking that tiger in the paw, And so the team was incredible. I mean, when I think about the team and I think about how, no spoiler alerts here, but, there was a motion to have me sanctioned. How dare we sue the world's largest bank? How dare we? And so why not go after the lawyer
That's
too?
that's part of the human interest story I think people would appreciate, because people suspect, it used to be a big issue in this country about the heinous criminal that got off on a technicality. We're curious about and often offended by the legal services we don't get, and we somehow think they should go in a different direction. This is a perfect example about what we thought would rightfully and justly happen to protect this family, and it went 180 degrees the other way.
Well, there's several stories in this story. You know, what happens with Sergeant Hurley, what happens with him while he's in Iraq, and he tries to go to the JAG officers for help.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when
JAG for our listeners is,
military man,
yeah,
Judge
Advocate General's
right.
office, yeah.
Those are the attorneys that are soldier attorneys that are supposed to be helping our service members. And you know, when I first met with Sergeant Hurley and his wife, I had never heard of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. I always thought it was the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act, just
Right.
like what I'm saying, because, you know, about other people and how they look at it today. Because attorneys don't realize this, but it really affects everything you do almost as an attorney. You file a lawsuit, there's a preamble, and the preamble is because of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act and its predecessor, the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. You can't sue somebody if they're on active duty. If you do, there's certain precautions that need to be taken to do it properly.
Right.
Or have someone held in default. Or in Michigan, these non-judicial foreclosures. That's just something that cannot be done while you're on active duty, non-judicially. There's a legal way to do it under the SCRA. That's what I refer to as the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act,
Right.
SCRA.
Right.
And there's just certain protections that have to be complied with. Again, we're not giving our service members protections and rights that aren't deserving or are not unrealistic.
Or put the other party at a disadvantage.
Right, yeah, we don't want to discourage lenders from helping our soldiers and service members, and so, you know, they're a very sought after entity to make loans to, and so, but they're our country's most precious asset, and don't they deserve these protections? And so I was saying how the book addresses that issue with the JAG officers. It addresses, I've tried to come to terms with, why did it take 5 years? Why would it take 5 years? And so I look at a little bit with the judiciary and what we were presented with judges and the judiciary in Michigan, as well as just the whole culture in Michigan. I mean, I try to just come to terms with what happened, and I listen to other people. Like I talk a lot about former Chief Justice Supreme Court, Justice Weaver, as well as Jim Ford. If anyone, you know, you have a Kalamazoo viewership, Jim Ford is one of the most well-respected attorneys in the Kalamazoo area. He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. His father was a pilot in World War II. I mean, he has a strong family heritage of the military. So he's an incredibly honorable person. And so I talk about some of the things that he's brought attention to relating to the judiciary, as well as just the culture in Michigan.
When you talk about that culture, and it's not, you do a good job of painting the culture just by telling the story. An average layman looks at this and it's like saying, there's a stop sign here at this corner, well, that's the end of it. So there's the SCRA that says you can't do this, and that should be the end of it. But it's not, and that's the whole story, and what you encountered and all the different things. You also cover, as you talk about the judiciary, the culture, and the climate, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, but you cite other people, authoritative, including former Chief Justice Weaver, who take a stab at the judicial culture in Michigan. Is not the best, and wouldn't be surprised by the difficulties that you ran into. Is that a fair assessment? They've witnessed this, and other people that have witnessed it from the outside wouldn't be surprised by what you ran into.
Well, like I said, I did the foundation because every week I'm getting calls from service members, and my effort in writing the book was to try to have the layperson enjoy reading it. You know, there's moments where I've been told that people are just so angry they have to put it down.
I was one of them.
And take a break, and then I'm told there's moments where they can't put the book down. They just can't put it down because they want to see what happens next.
Right.
And so the issues you're talking about kind of fly under the radar in the book because I'm not trying to get wrapped up into politics or going
And-
after people or being
Yeah.
in a position one way or another.
And-
I'm trying to help our soldiers and
Right,
service members.
right.
And so that's the purpose of this book, because the foundation can be more technical because I'm out there trying to help people. And it's a nonprofit foundation. And so I really would be excited if people looked at the website and tried to see if there's anything that, if they have an interest in our soldiers and service members of trying to help us out. Or if you want to try to understand what's going on with our active duty personnel and our service members, get the book, because you'll see the struggles I went through. How come I couldn't call Lansing and talk to the Military Veterans Affairs Department and have somebody help me with this?
Mhm.
They were still calling it the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. You know, Sergeant Hurley talks about how hard of a time he had in trying to find an attorney to represent him.
I remember that.
You know, that's what struck me too about the culture of lawyers and how lawyers do business. And I think we were lucky to have found each other, because I needed that purpose of having done something for my nation, because I didn't serve, and I've always regretted that.
Right.
And Sergeant Hurley, I think, was lucky to find an attorney that had that idea when he first met with me, because he had spent probably, I don't know what I said in the book, 6 to 8 months looking for a lawyer and couldn't find one.
And the book tells the story, incrementally and specifically what happened and what they endured while he was overseas. You pick up with him after he came back. But what's interesting is when he came back from overseas, the harm had been done. He's trying to get relief, and as you say, nobody wants to help him. Nobody seems to know how to help him. So, risking false flattery here, I can tell you as a serviceman, and people have seen it on TV, everybody's had a grievance at one time or another. They call an attorney and say, and then they read in the paper where some frivolous lawsuit got to trial.
Right.
This is discouraging. This is one of the reasons you got angry. Not only that these things happened to this wonderful family, but again, we see the frivolous lawsuit, the lady that poured coffee on herself from McDonald's and it went all the way to some court hearing, ultimately reserved. Here's a legitimate wrong, and this man can't get help.
Well,
I salute you for doing it.
Let me kind of think out loud here, because I want
Yeah.
you've asked a long question there. I want to talk about Judge Quist and his dismissal, and I want to talk about how when Sergeant Hurley came back, we have to remember, even though that foreclosure was illegal, it destroyed his credit. So
Yeah.
think about what that happened
yeah.
to him, and I talk about it in the book.
Well,
But you jumped right over
We're
one
going
of
to do
my
another session here, and I want you to get
Right.
into the technicalities of it without
Right.
giving away the book.
But
yeah.
you know, I can tell you enjoyed it because you jumped to the parts where you got your blood going.
Oh, boy.
But, you know, I talked about Sergeant Hurley going to Iraq, you know, not just coming back.
Right.
And I talk about him being in Iraq when he's 45 years old, and he's been in the Michigan National Guard for 25 years. He goes to Iraq. In chapter 1, I just love that, how he's chosen. I call him one of the lucky ones. Obviously sarcastic, because
Right.
he doesn't just fly into his base. He is in Kuwait, and he's part of the surge. So it was part of the issue of resupplying all of these troops. So he spent 3 days and nights driving a tanker to get to the Bloody Triangle.
Right.
And so imagine that when
Oh,
the
yeah.
war is at its
Yeah.
height,
Yeah.
and he's in a convoy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who our military's drawing from
That's
now.
right.
We call them citizen soldiers. I like to refer to him as Lincoln's 21st century soldier, because it's the same kind of
Well,
soldier he drew.
I'm a Vietnam veteran, and we all know how that went, both with the draft, the resistance to the draft, and that type of thing. I work with the Guard as a volunteer. We got about a minute left here, and we'll go on. So I see them around all the time. Wonderful people, outstanding people, committed, as you say, leave their families, do tremendous things on our behalf. But I also fault the politicians in this country that if it were that big a deal and it were they should have been pulling people, they should have drafted people. We put too much on folks that, we got about 30
We
seconds
got
here.
30 seconds left.
Yeah.
Where did the time go?
Huh? So
I mean,
told
that's
you,
incredible.
you'll
I
enjoy
mean,
it.
we have so many details to talk about.
I do have a few questions to ask you, but I think they'll direct to the details and things in this second half. But
Can I say one last thank you
I got 20 seconds.
to Sonia Hollins and Sean Hollins
Yeah.
with Fortitude Graphic and Design
Right.
and Season Press.
Okay.
And of course, Sergeant Hurley.
Yeah.
I mean, the guys.
Well, I
are
want to talk
great.
about that guy too a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Good.